The Dragon King's Daughter, Round 5. Lotus Bloom I, in this mucky trance. His name was Sonny T. He was the only guy in all of New York City who never tired of me. He stuck around even after I got fat from all the tofu. Sonny was the man who had introduced Sabra and Alberto to true Buddhism, and he had decided to make a bodhisattva out of me too. Sonny T proved to be just as stubborn as me. No matter how hard I tried to get rid of him by telling him to keep his religion to himself or whatever, he just wouldn't listen to me. He had been a junkie all of his life. He hadn't been able to quit until he started chanting, which he'd been doing for 5 years when I met him. I couldn't imagine going 5 years without heroin. That was really a dream worth considering. It turned out that Sonny did have more determination than I did, because he got me into Buddhism eventually. Sonny took me to my first Buddhist meeting, which happened to be on Riverside Drive in Harlem. The subway ride from Brooklyn to Harlem was a long one, and I took advantage of being with Sonny by observing the people on the subway train a little more closely than I would have had I been alone. Although Sonny was built like Joe Louis, it wasn't his stature that made me feel so secure by his side. It was, instead, his faith in his Buddhist practice that made me feel protected. He had the kind of friendly and open demeanor that made it seem as if he were eager to share his double-dimpled smile with anybody who came near him. His round, bald head and jovial expression, coupled with the way he ho-hoed life's miseries away, refreshed my spirit in humanity. He gave me hope, and that's one thing I was so devoid of that I followed him, half reluctantly, yet equally grateful for this second chance at life and living, as he led me on a journey into Harlem to experience my first Buddhist meeting. It was an early summer evening, Harlem style, hot and humid and swimming with people. The street vendors broadcasted what they were selling with their deep, dusky voices. It seemed everything they were selling symbolized life in Harlem. Homemade ice cream and barbecued chicken blended in with colorful toys for children. A man was selling posters of Jamaica, one of which portrayed 2 Rastafari children who had brown eyes that melted down with moisture as they looked up at you from the poster. The children were staring as if to see if you were really there with your camera eye, or were you just a dream within a dream, like some pale and see-through apparition. The neighborhood children squatted in huddles and rubbed the street with sharp scrap metal, hoping to scrape on out of Harlem, the same way I used to rub a stick between my hands, trying so diligently to be the creator of fire in my very own private sandbox when I was a child. I was with my mother when she bought the sand to fill my sandbox. I remember how excited she was to have something so special to offer to me. The sandbox was as treasured by me as the bedroom of my own, both being finishing touches to our new suburban home. Once the sandbox was completed, I escaped to it often. It was situated toward the end of the yard, beyond all the beautiful white Russian olive trees my mom planted on her own. The trees were a perfect addition to my backyard play. I paced my imaginary ponies through the saplings, weaving them through choreographed drills as regimentally as if I was training royal lipizaners. I'd unsaddle them and brush them down inside the sandbox stall, making sure they had enough water and hay before I retired to the house for my own dinner. The sandbox was also a place of deep meditation for me, being as sand is somehow akin to the sea, and everyone knows that water is good medicine for a traumatized psyche. I went to the sandbox after our Grandpa Hammond raped me on Easter. I went out there and thought about life in my 4-year-old head. As I thought about life, I rubbed a stick between my hands in hopes of drilling straight through to Beijing or anywhere else in the world where Hammond couldn't get me. I was willing to leave my frilly Easter dress and bonnet behind, along with a basket that was stuffed full to overflowing, chocolate bunnies and pastel eggs that translated into payment from the Easter ogre for sharing my little girl body. Every year when Easter comes around, I go into a depression. I gain weight, I lose control, I try to escape, I try to let go, I want to die, but I dare not suicide because I wouldn't want to lessen the impact of Sylvia Plath in all her truth and glory. I especially despise the ritualistic picture-taking ceremony that occurred at each family gathering. First, Hammond would line up all his little dolls next to our brother Chip. Then he would position us according to chronological age, or from ugliest to stupidest, as he would say. Behind us, he would situate the adults, including my grandmother, my Uncle Bill, his wife and children, and my mother, who was beyond the beauty of Grace Kelly. This picture-taking hullabaloo usually took place after Hammond had committed an incestuous rape on one of us girls. The barbaric ritual was sequential. First, there was the luring in of the children dressed so pretty. Candy and toys were offered from a lecherous grown man's hands. The grandfather rapist in my family became so brazen that he would molest a child around a kitchen corner with all the other adults within hearing range. But we would never bother to scream or cry or try to tell any of them about our victimization, because the other adults were totally absorbed in their cocktail conversations and would never have wanted to be bothered with our dirty stories. Besides, we were already psychologically locked into the secret code of silence that bonded our family, so Hammond would just smile a criminal smile because he knew he could get away with murder. His kind create teens who get pregnant and teens who prostitute themselves to a society still conducting surveys on who and why. Why don't we point our righteous fingers at our Hammonds instead of passing judgment on little girls? As Sonny and I continued to walk on down that Harlem street, I recognized the worn-out look in some of the Harlem mothers' eyes. A look so futile and beyond repair that Sonny would say, "She doesn't look happy. Hey, I better chant for her at the meeting. Life is for living. People have a right to be happy." Sonny just saw things that way. What I saw was different. It was the realization that the look on the mothers' faces signified a life in a world where a mother, no matter how brave, could never totally protect her children from life's atrocities. I recognized the true source of my anger at that moment. Hammond had taken away my mother's right to protect and give joy to her children. No matter how hard she tried to defeat or defy him, his power had been so internalized and cruel that she never could overcome his mental hold on her. I shuddered, rolled back my eyes in disdain, and struck out at the street, trying to paw through the concrete. Rage boiled through me. I was angry enough to determine right then and there that I would live in order to fight this insanity, no matter what, no matter when, no matter where. Sonny had been a New York City junkie for over 20 years and could more than match any street life adventure or sad story of mine. He just wasn't interested in the past whatsoever. Sonny was always thinking future, and that made him way more powerful than me. His sense of being congenial was catching like a spring cold. He brightened up each moment, making every corner we turned more and more open. It seemed that because Sonny T's countenance expressed so much sincere concern for humanity, he uplifted even the most downtrodden faces on the street. We entered a building and walked past some junkies who were all leaned back against the graffiti and urine on the hallway wall. They were knotted out cold. Their cigarettes were burning into the flesh on their fingers, and their heads bobbed heavily toward their shoulders, jerking up every so often in a reflex act that kept them from suffocating on their own slaughter. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, roared the voices of thunder as we entered the apartment of a Harlem chanter. Before me sat a room full of people kneeling in reverence toward the object of worship they were focused on. These were the bodhisattvas of the earth, right here in Harlem. There were actors, musicians, singers, artists, housewives, lawyers, models, and plenty of people fresh off of the streets who weren't quite sure what their calling in life would be. From the miasma of the drug and crime-ridden streets, the Lotus Sutra had flowered into a ceremony of human energy within the apartment walls. I knew that those walls had witnessed their fair share of human drudgery, but the humanity far outweighed the tragedy. The chanting was powerful, and the discussion that followed was just as enhancing. Here, from this great hearth of humanity, I began my Buddhist practice. Though not yet thoroughly convinced of its power, I knew there had to be something to it. I wanted to ease into it slowly, this practice of reading and reciting Chinese and Sanskrit characters, but Sonny insisted I did this practice wholeheartedly right from the start. And so I negotiated. 2 weeks after the meeting in Harlem, I went to Sonny T's apartment and propositioned him. Now this man did not have to put up with me, and to this day, I don't know why he did. Initially, I had been interested in chanting when it was still my idea. But when it was Sonny's heartfelt persistence spurring me on, I resisted. Human nature. Sonny took me to several Buddhist meetings where he introduced me to people from different lands and all walks of life. People who had every kind of Buddhist benefit to share with me, but I still refused to chant. I wanted to get high. On heroin. Even though Sonny had been consistently chanting for 5 years already, I knew he still had connections all over New York City, and I took advantage. Sonny, I said one morning, as if I were Eve incarnate, if you cop for me just once, I promise I will chant for the rest of my life. I figured this was a sure way to entice him. Sonny looked at me and shook his head. Hey, I can't do that, he said, and continued. Cause and effect are nothing to mess around with. This Buddhism is about life and living, Nisi, not about a death trap like dope. There will be no protection from life's forces if you act stupid. I just can't do it, Sonny finalized. I begged him, please. As I hissed out those S's, Sonny stared hard at me. I stood with my feet planted firmly on his front stoop. In that particular version of the Garden of Eden, Sonny could see with his Buddha vision that I was single-mindedly yearning for the last hidden apple and quite willing to march into hell for the not-so-heavenly cause of getting it. I dug my heels in deeper. "All right, I'll take you," he conceded. "Come by tomorrow and we'll go together. But you have to chant after this like you promised. And don't ask me to cop for you again." It was evident that Sonny was starting to feel that old urge coming on his own self and was going to go through with the deal in order to appease both of us. A notion he probably would have bypassed had I not been such a temptress. Sonny took me to the corner of some cross-section in Bedford Sky and left me hanging while he went into an apartment to cop for us. Sonny came out of the building he had disappeared into and said, "Let's go." We walked a few blocks until we arrived at a hectic corner where some men were hanging out looking real manly. Sonny walked me right up to a group of guys who were huddled together with their paper sack-covered 45-ounce beer bottles and all, and asked one of the guys if we could use his house to get off in. The guy turned his head toward mine and looked me square in the eye. Sonny introduced him as Cedric, and he was more than cordial. He nodded his head politely at our introduction and gave me a close-up view of a scar that cinched his ears together from beneath his jawbone. He had another scar that ran alongside of his face. It ran jagged like a mean and crooked river that ended up in a lip that was all twisted up at the delta. The rest of the guys looked just as brutal. Some were sporting knife cuts or broken beer bottle wounds, while others had scars left over from razors that shredded skin like paper. These and every other kind of violence-induced demarcation made them appear like they had been set up ritualistically for tribal scarring by a society that feigned not to be so sacrificial. Cedric took us down some stairs into his basement apartment where there were more men and more introductions. Although I've been running off to housing projects to explore Denver's ghettos my whole life, and although I had witnessed with my own eyes the most trying third worldly conditions, I had never seen the likes of these men before. I knew I was in strange and foreboding territory just by their conversation. They discussed the afternoon stickings, beatings, beer bottle face bashings, and poppings from guns and sawed-off shotguns with as much concern and expression as Mr. Cleaver talked to Wally about the beaver. Rough as they were, however, these men introduced me to every new male who entered the apartment with utmost respect and tolerance. They introduced me as Miss Lady from Colorado and offered me the choicest seats in the house in order to ensure my comfort. They were gentlemen through and through, sharing their unadulterated hospitality in exchange for a hit of dope. I failed to remember my own manners, though, and got in deep trouble when I complained about the dope being no good. "Well," I said, not thinking, "looks like I can tell the folks in Denver that Brooklyn dope ain't shit." No one in the room was impressed by my bad-ass comment. As a matter of fact, these men were thoroughly taken aback by my brazen attack on their China white heroin that should have been way better than the brown dope we did in the West. It took Sonny about 10 seconds to get me and my big mouth out of their apartment. He had us going down the street in such a big hurry that the men from the apartment barely had time to follow us out. But once they were on the street, they shouted, "Hey, little girl in your flowery dress, you don't know nothing about no Brooklyn heroin. You understand that? Yeah, you better get on out of here, talking your shit. Look at you trying to get a suntan on your shoulders, wishing you was black. I see them suntan lines. Why don't you come back here and talk some more about white girl shit?" The whole neighborhood was outside staring at us now. Sonny hailed a cab and got us out of there fast. There's plenty of wisdom behind the expression that misery comes from one's mouth, fortune comes from one's mind. I was reminded that day in Bedford Stuyvesant that there are times in life when it pays off tenfold to mind your manners and keep your mouth shut. But more importantly, I realized that I have, once again, been protected from myself. The bigger lesson of the day was the truth in Sonny T's earlier warning to me. He was right when he said we could not mess around with this practice of Buddhism. It was, to me, a strict warning not to push life's limits. I had this one chance at recovery. I was guilty, all right, of all the wrongdoings a drug habit will lead a kid into, but I was just that, still a kid in so many ways. And I knew no matter what lay ahead, at least life was indicating I still had a chance. I wasn't dead. And no matter how much I asked for death to define me, Sonny Barty was countering my self-sabotage by putting in even more time and effort to reconstruct me. Sonny was the man of the hour. He was dead set, deliberate, and true to his Buddha nature. He would not give up on me no matter how hard I tried to dissuade him. I had shown him my demons, and even they didn't scare him. He was more powerful than Oz in his determination to release me to my own power, to make me realize that I had inherited the ruby slippers and the emerald forest was wherever I happened to be. Sonny was sure that the eternal truth in life was the mystic law of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and he was determined to convince me of the same thing. He understood that although I pretended to be so brave, I was nothing more than false bravado. When I look back on how bleak my life was looking and how set I was on dying, I get real courageous. Like if I can survive that, I can survive anything. But now I know it was the incest that almost killed me. And so my guilt is lessened. I try to acknowledge the precious and sacred inside of me. I hate owning up to my own ugly, though. That you can believe. For every sacred, I got a dirty. And for every human judgment I make, I can see the very same potential in me. When I think about the Vietnam War, for instance, I can relate to all the atrocities that every man-child made. The rape and pillaging of decent village folk. Unimaginable acts such as these are understandable to me because I know the human mind can be manipulated and twisted into justifying anything.